Good morning, folks. We're out picking in the garden today. We got a weekend project we want to do, and I've been telling you for a couple times now that we're going to make our famous zucchini relish, and our zucchini's really coming on right now. We went out and picked a whole tote full of squash this morning, and this is probably our second picking. Kelly had picked some the other day. These yellow squash, kind of a yellow zucchini, very prolific. This was just off of one plant right here. I love picking the zucchini when it's like this size. This is really good for saute. The seeds aren't too big in it. But there's a couple big ones down in there. If you miss them, they start getting a little bigger. That one's not big at all, but you got a good sized one down there in the bottom. If they get too big, like we did in the zucchini bread recipe, just slice them long ways down the middle, get you a big tablespoon, and just scoop out those big seeds and the pulp in the middle, just like you would a pumpkin or something like that. And then the outer flesh is just like a regular zucchini. But we're going to be making our zucchini relish. And the first process is like a 12-hour process, which you're going to grind everything up and you're going to salt it down and let it sit for 12 hours. So you can plan around. I think we're going to grind all this up tomorrow evening, and then Sunday morning we're going to actually can it, so it'll sit overnight in that salt. But there's a few other ingredients we got to pick up. We need some red bell pepper and some green bell pepper, and I need to make sure I have enough vinegar. So we're going to pick that up in town today. My bell peppers are not producing yet, but they will be here later on. So we're going to get this process going, and we'll come back to you when we start grinding this stuff up. What you doing, Brandy? Been out running around? One thing I failed to mention, I have this old knife that we've used in the garden for years. It's an old fruit knife. My grandpa used to carry one around with him when he picked fruit. But these work really well for picking squash. You don't want to just reach in there and start twisting around. You'll see some people doing that, but you'll tear your vines up and stuff. So I always recommend cutting your squash off the vine. Alright, be back in a bit. So I made that crack the other day on that one zucchini bread video about the zucchini overpopulation disorder, and about how people would leave bags of zucchini in your pickup when you'd leave. Well, my friend out in California, she did this. Sent me a box of zucchini in the mail. Oh, she's a riot. Funny stuff. Alright, we didn't get to it last night, but we're going to do it first thing this morning. We're out here in the barn. We have we're setting up a meat processing area out here in the corner of the barn. So this is where our grinder is. We picked up this grinder not long after we moved here. I've been using one just like this out in California that belonged to a real good friend of mine. And fortunately, I could not bring it with me. It was a fantastic grinder, but we were so fortunate to find this one. It's a really nice industrial duty grinder. And if you didn't know, these can be wired for 110 or 220. So I had to rewire it when I got it. But I got the zucchini all ready to grind. And this is an 8-cup measuring cup. But if I fill it right to the brim, I know that's 10 cups. And we need 10 cups for each recipe of our zucchini relish. And I think we're going to do 2 recipes so we can kind of knock it out for the year and be done with it. So I've got the grinder all cleaned up, put back together, and we're going to get grinding. You can see that makes pretty short work of chopping this up. And I didn't always have one of these grinders. Back in the day, Mom had one of those little hand crank grinders that clamps on the side of the tabletop, and that's what we used, and that was always my job. And I really enjoyed it. I couldn't wait to start turning that crank on that thing and grinding that stuff up. So if you got one of those, you can use those. You can use a food processor. Works just fine as long as you don't go too crazy. You kind of wanted a relish consistency. You can see what we got here. Looks like relish already. So we're going to go get our bell peppers and our onions, and we're going to run it through this thing also. So for every batch of the zucchini relish, you need 1 red bell pepper, 1 green bell pepper, and 1 cup of onion. And we're doing a double batch, so we doubled that up. So we're going to run this through the grinder. Alright, so we got that ground up, and I had a little piece of the zucchini that I ran through there last, because there's always a little bit that gets stuck in the grinder in here inside the head. So I wanted to make sure and get all the onions and bell pepper out of there. So we're all done with this process, and we're going to go back inside, and we're going to take care of the rest of this, get the process going. It involves some salting and stuff like that, but we'll give you all the measurements. And those bell peppers, we just cored them. We didn't worry about getting all the white stuff out of the middle because it doesn't matter. We just took the cores out. But let's go inside and we'll continue this process. So next step is I'm draining this zucchini that we ground up. There was lots of moisture in it. So we've thrown it in a colander and we're letting it drain for a minute, and then we're going to remeasure 10 cups, and then we're going to put it in another bowl, and we'll do this with all the zucchini, and then we'll do it also with the onions and the bell peppers and everything that we ground up, and then we'll tell you what the next step is after that. Alright, we got our 20 cups of drained zucchini. I went out and ground a little bit more because of all that liquid in there. The original measurement was a little short once it was drained. So I ground up a little bit more to make 20 cups of drained zucchini, and then we mixed in all of the 2 red bell peppers, 2 green bell peppers, and 2 cups of onion. And remember, this is a double recipe, so cut that in half if you're going to make a single recipe. So the next step is to salt it, and for each recipe takes 5 tablespoons of salt. So we've added 10 tablespoons of salt to this mix, which is a half a cup plus 2 tablespoons if you're not wanting to do the individual tablespoons. So we're going to stir this up, and then it has to sit for 12 hours, and it's going to draw the liquid, more liquid out of that zucchini and the rest of the stuff. And you can see it's already given up some liquid in here, even without the salt mixed in. And then that's what we're looking for. And then in 12 hours, so it's 8:30 right now. At 8:30 tonight, we'll start cooking this up and canning it. See you then. I forgot to tell you, this does not need to be refrigerated. It's just going to be out on the counter here in the house. It's cool in the house. And it's got salt in it, so nothing bad's going to happen. You can see after we mixed it up, that beautiful relish. You can see the yellow bits from the yellow squash and the zucchini and the red bits from the bell peppers. Beautiful. It's going to get a little bit darker. We got a jar here in the fridge, I think. This is what the finished product looks like here, but you'll see that when we can it too. So we're just going to cover this with a towel and let her sit. In case any of you are wondering, we ground that with a number 12 or a 10 millimeter plate. I'd say the holes are about 3/8 of an inch, but that's what we used, and it looks pretty good for relish. Alright, it's been 12 hours, so the next process is you're going to throw that in the colander, and you're going to rinse the salt out of it with cold water, and then you're going to let that drain again, and then we're going to throw it in this big pot. Kelly's here helping us tonight, so we'll get this stuff canned up. But that's the next process. We'll come back when we're starting to throw some more ingredients in. Now, seeing us rinse that, you're probably thinking, you're washing all the flavor out of that stuff. Well, you got to wash the salt out. The salt was taking the moisture, a lot more of the moisture out of the zucchini. And just like any other pickle, your flavor's not really coming from the juice that was from the vegetable. It's coming from the brine that you're going to put in it. So just like a pickle, it's going to have that brine. And you're still going to taste the flavor of the vegetable itself. It's not all leached out of there. So that's what we're doing, in case you were wondering what this process is going to do to the stuff. So we got our mixture all strained out, and we got it in a pot. I don't have a heavy bottom pot, so we put a skillet underneath it, because we're going to have to keep it stirred up pretty often. So to that mix, remember we got a double batch, so you need to cut this in half if you're only going to make a single batch. We've added 6 cups of cider vinegar, 8 cups of sugar, and 2 tablespoons of each turmeric, nutmeg, dry mustard, and cornstarch. And we did 4 tablespoons of celery seed and 1 whole teaspoon of black pepper. We've got our lids going in the back. We've got the water boiling in our water bath canner. So once this mixture comes to a boil, we can put it in the jars. We have our jars all sterilized, ready to go. We're going to be using pint jars because that's a good size to keep in the fridge. So we'll come back when we're filling the jars. Alright, our mixture came to a boil. So now we're filling our jars. We're filling them up to that the shoulder, that big line on the shoulder of the jars. Grabbing our lids with our magnet. Putting the lids on. And then we tighten that lid down fairly snug, but not over tight. And then we're loading them in the can. Alright folks, we got them all filled. We got them in the canner. We got 16 jars in the canner. And then we have a partial over here that we're just going to let cool off and put in the fridge because we'll use it up. So as soon as the steam starts coming out of that pot, which it's doing now, so that pot's full of steam, we're going to set our timer at 30 minutes. Start it. So the old way is called water bath canning, which is you completely submerge the jars in water. But since they have figured out that the steam in the pot is actually hotter than the water, so we're doing a steam bath can instead of a water bath. Not to be confused with steam canning, with the pressure canning. This is just a steam bath. So all we have is a few inches of water in the bottom of that pot, and it's going at a full rolling boil, and there's an item in the bottom of that pot that holds the jars up off the bottom. So you don't want to put the jars right on the bottom of the pot, because then they clank around in the boiling water. So this is going to go 30 minutes, and we're going to turn the fire off. It will leave the lid on and just let this thing cool down. And then after everything stops boiling and things cool down a little bit, we'll take the lid off. And then before we go to bed tonight, we'll set these jars out on the counter. Make sure you put them on a dish towel, because if you have a cold counter, it could cause some thermal shock and cause your jar to break. Doesn't usually happen, but it can if you're not using high quality canning jars. You want to make sure you use canning jars and not like jars you get from the store. You can get by with it sometimes, but it's not always safe. And if you get one of them hot jars break and you get that stuff all over you, it'll burn you good. So don't chance it. We'll see you in 30 minutes. Alright, the canning process, the time expired, so we turned the fire off and we let the canner cool down a little bit. I just took the lid off, and I'm just going to leave these jars in here tonight. It looks like all the jars have sealed. They were all the lids are sucked down onto the jars, so it looks like we had 100% success, which we usually do, and you will have it also if you do everything correctly. So we're going to leave those sit till morning and let them cool off. The process isn't that difficult. You don't even have to use this big crazy pot. You can use whatever big pot you have. Just make sure there's something at the bottom of it to keep the jars from clanking around. So that will probably last us until next season. So we probably won't need to can any more of that unless we give a bunch of it away, and then we'll need to do another batch. But I hope you try it. It'll be your new favorite relish. I guarantee you it's so wonderful on hot dogs. It's amazing. We'll eat hot dogs a couple times a week, and we got a jar of that open. So, Jerry Lynn, the squash you sent me in the mail, we put that in the batch too. It was still edible when it got here. So I'm going to put the recipe in the description, so don't think you got to try to write everything down during the video. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you back here on Mark Kelly Farm.